180. Is that the magic number? I'm Lindsay Perry from CoachPerry.com, where we help you get fitter, faster and stronger. Today we are going to unpack cadence. Is 180 really the magic number? Where did that come from? Should you be working on changing your cadence? Is it important? And ultimately, is there actually a magic number? So let's dive into where did 180 come from. Like so many things in running, we often take what the best do and try and squeeze that down into the population. Roughly 2 decades ago, there was a really cool analysis done on the East Africans, particularly around Gabriel Selassie and then Bekele and then a couple of the Kenyans, where they looked at running mechanics which included stride frequency. Ultimately, that's where the number 180 comes from, because that was the average number that the most successful athletes at that time were running at. And that has now become the holy grail for all of us to try and aim for at 180. So that's where the number 180 comes from. The reality is, does cadence really matter? I'm going to hand over to Shona now, and she's going to dive into that.
So does cadence matter? Yes, in the greater scheme of running, it really does. Cadence has got to do with the amount of time, or your ground contact time, so the amount of time your foot is spending with the ground. So from a greater running point of view, yes, it does matter. The less time you spend on the ground, the faster you'll become. But it doesn't really matter in terms of your actual training as much as you think it does. It's very hard to think about something like that with every single step that you take. And so my advice would be to rather look at that over the trend over your entire season or your training block to see how your cadence is changing. So not necessarily focusing on this particular training session and how that is affected and what's happening in your cadence, but rather looking at your number for your cadence and how that's moved or changed over a training block or over a season, and really trying to make some inferences from that. Lindsay's going to touch on whether or not there is some sort of magic number with cadence, and we'll hand over to him in a little bit, but really just start rather focusing for you on what your trend is over time.
One of the components that does affect cadence is strength and strength training. Why is it important? If you think about each stride that you take, firstly, the forces that you're putting out in those strides, having improved strength and good strong muscles allows you to be able to put out more force or more power into each of those strides. The next thing is a muscle firing frequency as well, in terms of how fast are your muscles able to respond to increased cadence, for example. So if you start striding it out, you start looking for a little bit more speed, you might have a sprint to the finish line if it comes to that. You want your muscles or your body to be able to react quite quickly to that. Being able to do proper strength training, specific kind of work that will prepare you to be able to handle those loads and those forces on the legs, will improve your cadence or help improve your cadence with all other measures put in place.
So, is there actually a magic number? The reality is that there's probably a magic number for each individual, and there's probably a magic number for each situation that you find yourself in. Let me unpack that just a little bit. Each of us is put together slightly differently. No two human beings are exactly the same. We have got differences in femur length, differences in tibia length, differences in feet size, differences in calcaneus length. All of these things come together to determine where and how is the best way for you to run as an individual. Things like hip mobility, strength, as Devlin has unpacked, are going to tell you a little bit about exactly where your cadence should lie. But striving to run at the same cadence as the best specimens on earth is not always going to be the right way to do things. Let's look at it slightly differently. If we have someone who's really tall versus someone who's really short, there are two ways in which we can both run comfortably and easily, and there are similarly different ways in which we can then increase our speed. So we know that speed is a function of both stride length and stride frequency. And the best and most efficient way to run is to determine what our optimal stride length is, so that we are not putting our front foot too far out in front of our body and creating too much of a impact force when we land, and getting our foot landing underneath us, and how quickly our cadence can change and give us a range so that we can speed up and slow down when we need to. So that in a nutshell are all the things that come together to determine for you as an individual what your ideal cadence should be. And then, as I said, there's also a situation for slightly different cadences. For example, going uphill or going downhill, there are going to be different requirements for stride length and stride frequency. So the answer very simply is that there isn't a magic number that we should all be chasing after. We all should probably look to be increasing cadence slightly, because a higher cadence means tapping into the cardiovascular system. A lower cadence means tapping more into the physical and musculoskeletal system. But we don't all want to be chasing a specific number, because we are all different. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do hit the like button. We've created an awesome video about running form that will help you to settle on the right cadence for yourself. So click on the button and watch that now.